Hello gamers and welcome back. I'm Rob, of course, or Warshak if you want to call me by my in-game name. In this video, we're going to be going over the most popular decks in Hearthstone. So what does that mean when you queue into ranked play or ladder? You're going to be seeing these decks 90 to 95% of the time when you're playing against that certain class. So from there, we'll go ahead and we'll break down the most popular classes, the most popular decks that fall under those classes, anything that's recently changed. There's been a couple cards that have actually moved in and out of these decks as they've continued to get refined. You know, we've seen at the HCC World Championships, a couple decks come up that we hadn't seen prior to that. Also, we've got changes to Corridor Creeper and a couple Pirates and Raza right around the corner as well. This video will not be containing those changes as they have not occurred yet. So just keep in mind when you watch this video, you'll be like, why do you have these cards in this deck? It's not like that anymore. Well, the reason being is because when this video is being recorded, those changes have not been made, and a new video will come out once the changes have been made and we can figure out what kind of decks and what changes to the decks we'll see again once the nerfs have been made. So without further ado, we're going to be taking a look at Priest. More specifically, Highlander Priest is the first deck we're going to be looking at. The deck really hasn't changed a ton. There's been a few modifications in regard to some playing Gadsden Auctioneer, some playing Lyra. You've got Mass Dispel, you've got Silence in some of them. You've got also like a Dragon Highlander floating around, which kind of falls under the same category of this deck, so we're not going to cover the Dragon Highlander. I will note it at the end of our deck discussion here, but as we know, Highlander Priest revolves around cycling very heavily until you can draw Raza and or Anduin. From there, you play the two cards and you combo those with Velen and Mind Blast to do upwards, I think, 42 damage-ish is like the max you can do. But most of the time, it does anywhere between like 28 and 34, which can kill your opponent in one turn. The deck is the best deck to play. As of now, you're looking, hey Rob, I get the question a ton. Hey Rob, what's the absolute best deck to possibly play on ladder? This is the deck. This deck is brought to every tournament. Every player brings it. When you're playing Priest, you know, 75% of the time it's this deck, you know, plus or minus one or two cards based on the person's preference. You know what I'm saying? Some people may like Lyra instead of Auctioneer. I'm currently playing Auctioneer instead of Lyra. But the deck basically runs the same way. Taking a look at Rob, but there's a Dragon Highlander. What's the difference? The Dragon Highlander doesn't draw as much, so it doesn't cycle as much, which means you don't draw your Raza and Anduin as often. But in replace of not drawing them as often, you basically have dragons that you can play that kind of put board pressure down that allows you to maybe win in some other ways than just using the combo. But why would you need any other way to beat somebody with dragons when the combo can just kill them guaranteed, right? So the dragon's kind of just like a fun other way to look at this deck. You know, the deck is still very, very powerful. It's just probably slightly worse than the just normal Highlander Raza Priest. In the deck, it is what it is. I'm sure you guys have seen enough of it, so I don't want to cover it too much, as if you play ladder at all, you know the deck, you've seen it. But we still have to cover it because it is, again, the most popular Priest deck right now. Moving to probably the least popular Priest deck, but something I still wanted to include in this video is the Big Priest. Again, nothing's really changed with this deck too much. Couple key differences that you can tech into the deck is some form of Silence. So Mass Dispel or Silence we're starting to see in the deck. Also, Holy Smite has now made it into some of these decks, along with Holy Fire, which has seen some play, and also Highlander with this deck. So there's just a couple card differences, but overall the deck runs the same. You want to Barnes, summon giant minions. From there, Eternal Servitude or Shadow Essence into more giant minions, and in the late game you're able to just summon all your giant minions back with lesser diamond spellstone, and also obviously just play them out. Very high rolly deck. So what does that mean? You know, if you happen to draw Barnes on turn 3 and can coin into him, or on 4, and then you've got the Eternal Servitude, most of the time you can just win on turn 6 because your opponent can't deal with a Rage that pulls out another 9-drop on turn 5. Most decks just cannot deal with the power spike. So that'd be like a really high roll. But unfortunately, with high roll decks, sometimes you low roll. So sometimes, you know, you just don't draw Barnes, you get Barnes out of your Shadow Essence. So it has the potential to be very, very, very good, and also has the potential to really screw you over in some situations, just because of the way the deck functions. Currently, this deck falls behind Highlander, of course. I really don't think this deck is that bad. It catches a lot of people off surprise, because first thing when people play against, they think Priest, they think Highlander, they mulligan for that. But when you play some sort of Big Priest, you know, a lot of people have forgot how to play around Big Priest, so you actually pull off some pretty good wins with this deck, in my opinion. Again, this is also one of the most hated decks just because it high rolls so much. People don't like getting Barnes into Rage. It's not a good feeling. Moving to the next deck is going to be the Spiteful Summoner Priest, one of the cheapest, most effective decks to play on ladder right now. When people say, hey, Rob, was a really cheap, good deck to play, this Spiteful Summoner Priest is only 3,300 dust, and it can carry you to Legend. No problem. Some renditions run Prince. I've decided not to run Prince in this one because, first of all, it makes the deck cheaper, and second of all, I don't think it matters. I would rather have other 2-drops like Netherspite Historian and Shadow Ascendant in my deck than Prince, because this deck has no card draw, which means you're basically, if you draw Prince in the opening 6 cards, that's pretty good, right? But the beginning, it just doesn't, how do I explain this? You can run Prince if you want, but not running Prince isn't going to be like, oh, because I didn't run Prince, my matchup percentage is gone down 10%. No, Prince makes a very small percentage difference in this deck, if any. So with that, this deck's power spike comes basically on turn 4 to turn 6, where you can play cards like Twilight Drake, Dustbreaker, Cobalt Scalebane, Dragonoid Operatives, and the Spiteful Summoner, which is why this is called Spiteful Summoner Priest. It only runs the two spells of 2 each, a Free from Amber and Mind Control. So every time you Spiteful Summoner, you're summoning an 8er or a 10-drop, which is huge. You have 2 of them in the deck, and both of these spells are good normally on their own anyway, especially with all the Warlock on ladder. You're able to, you know, mind control Doom Guards or Void Walkers or whatever the case may be. You know, having good cards that cost a high amount as well is nice. There's some situations where having high cost spells in the decks, the spells actually aren't that good. So you, like, as good as Spiteful Summoner is, the spell itself isn't good. So when you end up drawing it, it kind of hurts you more than helps you. But in this situation, the spells are pretty good in the deck. The overall flow of the deck, each minion in the deck has its very specific purpose and is very good at that. And basically this deck just curves your opponent out. There's a couple decks that actually are very similar to this. You have a Spiteful Druid, which is running around, not that popular yet, so I didn't want to include it in our monthly meta, because, you know, I want to cover the most popular decks. Again, I could go on for hours and talk about every possible deck that you could play against, but that's pointless. I want to go over 90 to 95% of the decks you're going to see. But basically, when you have a very minion-heavy deck, that means you're not having to worry about casting spells, which means you can just worry about playing minions and trading minions, which is like the most simplistic form of the game, is just knowing how to trade, what minions to play, and you don't even have to worry about any spells or any AoEs and stuff like that. So again, if you're a newer player and you just kind of want to get the feel of the game, I do recommend playing very minion-heavy decks. So you got like the Spiteful Summoner Priest, you got Zoo Warlock, which we'll cover in a little bit. The next deck we're going to cover is the Combo Dragon Priest, a very difficult deck to play. Again, very cheap. This is another deck that can take you to Legend. It's just shy of 3,500 dust. The combo of this deck comes from being able to have high health pool minions. From there, you go ahead and you Divine Spirit them, which doubles their health, or you Talon Priest them, which increases their health. From there, when their health is upwards of the 18, 20, 30 mark, sometimes you can even go as crazy as like 64 health. You go Inner Fire, which copies their health to their attack, so you have a 64 minion, and you just go face and you kill your opponent in 1 turn, hence the Combo Dragon Priest. What makes this deck hard is because sometimes you use the combo to clear other minions, sometimes you use the combo to set for an OTK, sometimes you use the combo just to, because you don't expect the minion to live to your turn to attack with it to do the combo. You actually have to do the combo early, knowing that your opponent, based on their class, can't do much against it. So if you're playing, let's say, against a Druid doesn't really have any huge single target AoE that can deal with a 20/20 minion. So it's pretty safe to bet to play a 20/20 minion against a Druid on turn 3. Meanwhile, if you play a 20/20 Druid against another Priest on turn 3, all they have to do is silence it or Shadow Word Death it. So normally it depends on what class you're doing against, or what class you're playing against to do the combo, in which order, and if to do the combo at all. So very interesting deck, very hard deck to play, but a very powerful deck at that. And a person that made this deck as popular it is today is Asmo. He used to, like a month ago, he played a ton of this deck. It was every stream. Unfortunately, I don't really like watching this particular deck play out because I find it kind of boring. But it's a fun deck if you like the whole combo thing and doing big daddy damage in 1 turn. Moving to Paladin is our next class. We have the just Aggro Paladin here. It revolves around just little resilient minions that buff each other or just good on their own, like Knife Juggler and Direwolf. From there, you have cards like Lost in the Jungle, Ardent Squire, and Cheap Pirates to be able to pump out in the early game. if you're not buffing them on turn 4, Blessings of King, you're summoning summoning them from your deck with Call to Arms, and then from there, once you've basically thrown up everything in your hand on the board, because again, most of this deck is completely minions, you go ahead and Divine Favor, which basically draws as many cards as in your opponent's hand as in your hand. So let's say you're playing against a control deck on turn 4 or 5. Most of the time, a control deck will have upwards of 6, 7, 8 cards in their hand, and Divine Favor costs 3, so most of the time you're paying 3 mana to draw 4 or more cards, which helps this deck because most of the cards in this deck are very, very cheap. Most of the stuff revolves around 3 mana or less. There's a different rendition of this deck, which runs basically the same way, and that is going to be the Aggro Murlocs. Again, has almost the same exact setup, but instead of like pirates and direwolves, it has Murlocs instead. Murlocs have great synergy with one another. They're able to buff each other, and you get board buffs with Gentle Megasaur. Which of these decks is better, Rob? I would say it has to go with preference. Both decks are very powerful. Both decks run almost the exact same card list. Again, one just Murlocs, one does not. One has pirates, one does not. They both run the Divine Favors, the buff, the Kings, the Call to Arms, and stuff like that. So I would have to say it just goes with preference. Also, the curve in the Murloc deck is, I think, a little bit higher, just slightly, because of the Gentle Megasaurs, the Call to Arms, the Kings, the Sunkeeper, and the Valinar. But I'm pretty sure all of those, besides the Megasaur, are in the other one, and the other one runs Spellbreaker instead of Gentle Megasaur. So I think this one, though, is a little bit more not in your face, but still pretty in your face. So your preference, both decks right now are really, really good. If you don't have any Murlocs, then build the other deck. If you have Murlocs and no pirates, you build the other deck. And you got to keep in mind, Patches is still a legendary and is getting nerfed. So I think this Murloc one will actually be a better one to build based on the upcoming changes that we know are going to occur. Again, guys, this video does not contain the buffs or the nerfs yet, because all these decks, or more of the aggro decks, contain Corridor Creeper. When that change happens, maybe they'll just go to play Spellbreaker instead. The Corridor Creeper nerf is not really going to hurt these decks a ton, as, you know, the deck overall is very good. Corridor Creeper was just kind of like a swingy card against other aggro decks, but in regards to playing against control decks, you still have all of the main resources in the deck to be able to do great things. Moving on to Rogue, we have the Tempo Rogue. A lot of people run Lich King. Well, actually, we won't move into the card text, but the deck really hasn't changed at all, guys. Running 1 Cold Blood, running 2 Cold Bloods. It's preference. The main point of this deck is basically be able to play Prince most of the time on turn 2. Shadow Step him if you want, or you can Shadow Step cards like Vile Spine Slayer for crazy amounts of removal. But some people, again, they run like the Karen, Lich King. Some people run Double Scalebane. I've decided, because most of the time the game is over by turn 7 anyway, that Lich King is kind of unnecessary. If I'm hoping to draw Lich King for the win, it's probably a little bit too late in the game. This deck's going to get burnt out. On top of that, there was one other keynote I wanted to mention here. There's no Leroy in the deck. I don't like playing Leroy. I hate when people play Leroy against me, so I don't play Leroy myself, in the hopes that some people are like, wow, he'd actually never... He didn't have Leroy in his deck. I'm going to take out Leroy too, because he's a cool guy. I know that ideology is never going to work, but in my decks, I normally just try to stray away from Leroy. Even though he's good, I just don't like the card. I hate losing I hate losing to top deck Leroy, so I don't want to do that to other players, because I'm sure they don't like it as well. But besides that, this deck's been around a while. I don't want to explain it too much. Very, very powerful deck. A lot of people are playing it, and there's quite a few modifications, like I said, in tech cards. Lich King, Karen, you know, 2 Scalebanes, 1 Scalebane, Spellbreaker, no Spellbreaker, Sonya Shadow Dancer. But the core of the deck is to basically play a minion every turn, combo those minions. Elven Minstrel draws you more minions. It's just a very minion-heavy, bursty kind of deck. Moving to a deck that we have not seen in a long time. This is one of the ones I was mentioning in the start of the video, and we're seeing a rise in Quest Rogue. I saw in the last week of this past season, even at the lower legend ranks, and even at the ranks of between 3 and 1, I was seeing a lot of Quest Rogue. And I think this is because we're seeing a lot more Highlander on ladder. We're seeing a lot of Cube Lock on ladder. We're seeing a lot of Control Lock. We're seeing a lot of Control Mage. So when control decks get a little bit more popular, or they gain popularity, you see anti-control decks like this. There's no ability for a control deck to deal with a massive amount of 5/5s, especially when they have charge and can deal upwards of 25 to 30 damage in one turn, and then reload and have another, 15 to 20 damage the next turn. So this deck is very, very powerful against slower decks. And right now, again, we are seeing a rise of slower decks, and especially when these new nerfs happen. Maybe we'll see more players going to control side. If more players are playing control, we'll see more quest mage. We'll see more quest rogue and more quest mage in regards to the control deck rise to kind of keep it in balance. And then Rob, well, if I don't want to play control and then I don't want to play anti-control, what do I play? You just play aggro. Aggro destroys quest rogue. Aggro destroys quest mage. So all you have to do is then just play Warlock Paladin, and you not only wreck the people playing anti-control, I wouldn't say most of the time, but a lot of times you can also beat the people just playing control, because, you know, aggro decks are just good at burning down your opponent. If your opponent doesn't have the removal, they just lose. It's one of those things where it's like, do you have it? Okay, you don't, I win. Okay, you have it. Okay, I'm gonna reload on the board again. Do you have it again? You do. Okay, I lose. All right, you don't, I win. It's like Hearthstone simplified down to the max. We would go over Hunter, guys, but unfortunately, currently there are no good Hunter decks. If you see a Hunter on ladder, it's probably just a face Hunter, but it's not actually a very popular deck. I think I saw less than 5% of Hunter entirely last season. So I'm not going to really cover a deck that's not that popular. But again, if you happen to see Hunter, just expect it to be very, very, very aggressive. Moving on to Druid. We have the Jade Druid. This deck, again, also really hasn't changed in the past. Very minor changes. We've seen branching paths added, Ironwood Golem, and Oaken Summons. This is basically because armor is very important. There's a lot of Highlander Priest out there, and Highlander Priest can't get through armor above, like, once you get above like 50 health, there's no way they're going to be able to burst you down in one turn. Once you kill their villain and they've used their Mind Blast, it's basically their whole like power spike turn where they do like 30 damage. And if you're still at 20 and you're still gaining armor and you have the board and you still have the Jades going, it's very difficult for them to be able to pull off a win. It's also Oaken Summons into, you know, the Golem is very powerful against other aggro decks. You know, a 3/6 with Taunt on turn 4 is pretty good. And a lot of times you make me do it on turn 3 because you're able to do Wild Growth, and, you know, it's actually your opponent's turn 3, not your turn 3. It'd be your turn 4, but their turn 3. Spellstone minutes away in the deck. Again, a really good card. Mark of the Lotus. I like to see that card still in the deck. I see a lot of players not playing Mark of the Lotus, but double branching paths, double the Mark of the Lotus allows this deck to burst down your opponent, because let's say you go Spreading Plague and it makes a bunch of 1/5s, and normally the 1/5s are just like taunt walls against aggro decks, but sometimes you can use them against mid-range or control decks, because you're able to go ahead and go Mark of the Lotus or branching passing it. I'll give them attack. If you have 4 creatures down, you do branching pass plus 1 attack each. That's a burst of little 8 damage there for 4 mana. So that's a double swipe just off 1 card, buffing the creatures that really didn't do anything in the first place besides be a wall. So this deck has actually been modified. Even I think it's better now than it has been in quite some time. And I'm surprised I don't see more people playing Jade Druid. But the reason we might not see people playing Jade Druid is because Control Warlock and Control Mage are pretty popular. And also Highlander Priest, and all of those decks currently run Geist. Or at least most of those decks run Geist. And Geist absolutely destroys this deck in the late game. If you can beat your opponent, because sometimes Jade Druid just curves out to a point where they just basically play a Jade every single turn from turn like 2 or 3, and then by turn 7 or 8 their Jades are, you know, 6, 6, 7, 7s, and there's no ability for you to clear that amount of Jades. There's just not a lot of decks that can handle that. So, you know, depending on the draw, just because you do play Geist doesn't mean you automatically win in this matchup. You know, if your opponent just out rushes you, regardless if you've killed Jade Idols, you still have to deal with all of the other Jades that are in the deck, not just Jade Idol. So very powerful deck. Jade is still a thing, and it will be a thing until it gets rotated out in the next expansion. Aggro Druid. This deck originally took a hit with losing the Innervate. Didn't actually lose Innervate. Innervate got nerfed. Why the fuck does my body look all fucking wiggly diggly? Is there a way we can fix this? I've been like looking down at myself and I'm like fucking... Oh, there's not really a great way to do that. Fix it a little bit. All right. It took an original hit when they nerfed Innervate, and ever since then it's kind of been building back up into a competitive deck. It's actually seen, I actually have seen a lot more Aggro Druid the past week and a half than I have the Jade Druid. And I think that's just because, again, there's a lot of slower decks out there, a lot of quest decks that are popping up, and people are like, okay, well, if you're just going to play quest rogue, I'm just going to wreck you with any sort of aggro deck I play. So Aggro Druid was brought to the World Championship and did pretty well there as well. So that's why I think we're seeing it again. I built mine slightly different. I have Vicious Fledgling in here. I don't run the Pirate package because I normally just don't like the Pirate package. I think Patches is a fucking horrible design card, and I'm glad he's getting nerfed. So I decided, you know, I don't want when your opponent sees patches come down on turn, 3 if they play captain, or just 1 because you've played Blood Corsair or whatever his name is. It's just a really bad feeling for your opponent, and I care about my opponents. I really do. So, no patches in the deck. You're more than welcome to run the pirate package if you like. I decided to go ahead and run Crypt Lord and Crazed Alchemist instead. So a cool little combo is if your opponent plays Doomsayer, you can just go ahead and Crazed Alchemist, which is Mage is really popular now. The Control Mage variant is. But also with the Crypt Lord, you can get them up to like 10 HP, and then you just Crazed Alchemist, and you got you have a 10 damage attack burster, dude. So it's just a fantastic little cheesy way to win a game, and it's pretty cool. And a lot of people don't expect it anymore because it's not very popular. So when something's not very popular, and that's when your boy is playing it. Moving on to, I would say Shaman, but there currently is no popular Shaman deck. Evolve Shaman just continuously gets hit in the face with a giant stick because they keep printing these awful high-statted minions, or high mana cost minions with bad stats, and it's good that they do that because Evolve Shaman wasn't, in my opinion, I dislike the deck so much because it was just a high roll deck. If you evolve into something and they get something crazy, they just win the game. You go Doppelgangster Evolve on 5 and they get crazy shit. Not a lot of decks can deal with that. The player didn't actually do anything other than play 2 cards and hope the game generated a good outcome. You know what I'm saying? So right now, the outcomes of Evolves are not the greatest they've ever been, which means we're not going to see Evolved Shamans that much just because the deck in itself is not as high rolly. We're seeing Spiteful Priest instead because there's a lot greater chance that an 8 or a 10 mana card from Spiteful Priest is going to be, or Spiteful Summoner is going to be good. So that's that explanation there. The next class we're going to be talking about is going to be the Mage, but more specifically the Control Mage. This deck actually popped up at the World Championship. Frozen brought it and did very, very, very well with this deck. And mainly it's targeting aggro decks because of how much AoE it has, and then also Highlander Priest. Again, like we've discussed earlier, one of the most popular decks currently in the game, and just what you can find on ladder. And this deck does very well against the Highlander Priest. And again, it does fairly well against the aggressive base decks because of the, the double Dragon's Fury, the double Blizzard, the double Meteor, Flame Strike, Jaina, Galaka Crawler, the amount of armor you can gain with the Arcanes. So from there, we've seen a rise of this Control Mage. Because we've seen a rise of the Control Mage is, again, kind of full circling back to why we've seen Quest Rogue pop back up and Quest Mage. But I'd have to say Quest Mage is really not that popular. If you're playing against a Mage, it's probably going to be Tempo or this Control variant. Interesting enough, I've actually built my own different kind of Control Mage that farms Highlander Priest. It farms other Control Mages. It farms Control Warlocks. It does super well against everything but Quest Mage, which it actually beat. Yeah, well, the Quest Mage not even good. It's the Quest Rogue that gets me with the new with the new Control Mage I built. So maybe, depending on how well that deck does, it'll be like the new kind of style of Control Mage. I'll be playing it this month on stream because I've been having a blast with it. It's basically, I called it the ultimate value Control Mage because we run Double Tome, which seems so silly, but it's so good. So you guys, I'll have to see it. But yeah, it's very similar to this, but it's pretty different at the same time. Moving to Tempo Mage, again, once the Corridor Creeper gets nerfed, I'm sure we'll just see some slight changes to the deck, maybe another Arcane Intellect and a Spellbender, or maybe just another Cabal Lackey and another Secret. Again, losing the Corridor Creepers in decks like these doesn't really, it affects the deck a little bit, but you can just replace it off with something else. It's also cool to see Tempo Mage back, and that's in due because of the Alunith. The Alunith allows you to basically dump your hand as soon as possible, play Alunith on 6, and then draw 3 cards at the end of your turn, allowing you to kind of spam shit, whether you're going face with spells, killing their creatures with spells to keep your creatures alive. Regardless, drawing 3 cards plus the natural draw you have at the start of each turn, meaning 4 draws a turn, is absolutely insane. No deck can keep up with it regardless. Like, if both players on turn 6 are equal on board and you play a Lunith, you win the game. Like, there's no way a deck can just keep up with that amount of card draw because it's just going to turn into them using they don't care about saving stuff because they're just drawing 4 more cards the next turn. Oh gosh, we need to take a sip. That's what talking for like 20-25 minutes straight will do. It destroys your voice. Warrior, again, we would talk about Warrior, but there's really not any cool or interesting Warrior decks right now. If you happen to play Warrior, it's going to be against like a Pirate Warrior. Rob, you're losing it. You got one more class to do. Yeah, so if you play against Warrior, it's going to be Pirates, unfortunately. There's really nothing cool going on there. I've tried the N'Zoth Warrior, I've tried the Cthulhu Warrior, I've tried just Control Warrior. We played a lot of that the last couple days on Legend. It actually performed pretty well. Cthulhu Warrior performed the best out of all the other decks with like a 62% win rate in Legend. But let's not tell anybody that because, oh man, the deck was so awful to play. Like, if I had to play against a Cthulhu Warrior and I was a Tempo Rogue, I would not want to be the Tempo Rogue. Cthulhu Warrior wrecked him. And hopefully you guys will be seeing those videos soon. They should be up. Moving to Warlock, the first deck we have is the just natural control Warlock. This is currently the same deck list I hit Legend with this month. I like this deck. This is probably one of my favorite decks to play right now. I wouldn't say it's my favorite of all time. It's just I love control decks, and this deck does everything. Like, it just controls, man. In the early game, you just draw, you heal yourself with Mistress, you clear the board, you make it to the mid game. You play Lackeys, Rin, or Geist. From the mid game, you're going to be going into Void Lords, N'Zoth, Gul'dan, Giants. You know what they're saying? This deck has AoE, it has single target removal, it has giant minions, it has survivability with Gul'dan and N'Zoth. And the only thing you really need to worry about is going into fatigue. But if you're in the matchup where you know you're playing against another control deck, you just make sure not to tap as much as you normally would, because this deck can hit fatigue real quick. So you just got to play this deck right. Very powerful deck. I know, Rob, why isn't there Stonehill Defenders? You can get more Void Lords. I've decided to play other things besides Stonehill Defenders. You're more than welcome to play Stonehill Defenders and do other things. Rob, why is there not the 3-mana Prince card that lets you copy a minion and you get more stuff? This deck has enough value, guys. If you want to play cards like that, you're more than welcome. I'm thinking the one Spellbreaker and the one Doomsayer allow me, like, if I'm playing against another control deck with this deck, I win most of the time, besides Highlander. We get destroyed by Highlander. But besides that, if we play against another Warlock, a Cube Lock, a Control Mage, any sort of other control deck, we dominate them. It's the aggro decks that we want to make sure we win as well, because this deck does pretty well against aggro decks because of the Void Lords. So that's why we run the Doomsayers and the Spellbreakers and all of that AoE in the beginning, is because we just need to live long enough to be able to play those Void Lords to be able to bring them back with Blood Reaver, Gul'dan, and N'Zoth. As cool as the little Prince 3-drop is, he doesn't actually help us survive in the early game, because you want him to copy a good minion, and by the time you play good minions, you would have won anyway against the aggro decks. You don't need the Prince 2. And if you're playing against other control decks, you don't need that because you have Gul'dan and N'Zoth. So it's kind of just, that's my thought process there. If you don't agree, you're more than welcome to change it. It's not the specific 1 or 2 card differences in the deck, guys, that'll make difference. It's the foundation of the deck. I know I normally mention this a lot more, and it's way late in the video, so I'm gonna get a ton of comments. Rob, why isn't there this and this, and this deck's wrong because it doesn't have this one card in it? It's like, guys, it's not that one specific card that makes the deck, it's the foundation of the deck. It's the 20 to 25 core cards. You know, cards like Blood Reaver, N'Zoth, Void Daddies, Rin, Possessed Lackeys, stuff like that. Moving to another form of control Warlock, but it's more of a combo deck, and it's going to be the Cube Lock. I almost forgot the name of it. It's Cube Lock, and it revolves around playing the weapon, getting out your Doom Guards, using Faceless Manipulator or Carnivorous Cubes on Doom Guards, going Dark Pact, making more Doom Guards, and then finally Blood Reaver Gul'daning and making a field full of Doom Guards. You can do the same thing with Void Lords if you want to be more defensive. The deck is exceedingly powerful, definitely tier 1, sitting right behind Highlander Priest. This deck does well against Highlander Priest. This deck does struggle against other aggressive decks, though, if you don't get an early Void Lord out, because first of all, it doesn't run any Siphon Souls. It doesn't run any Twisting Nethers, which is it doesn't run Rin. You know what I'm saying? So there's a lot of sacrifices that this deck made. It also, in my edition, I don't run Umbra. I've replaced Umbra with N'Zoth because I found that this deck loses against other control decks if the other control deck knows how to play against a Cube Lock. And most of the time when I'm playing against a Cube Lock, I know they don't run N'Zoth or Twisting Nethers or Siphon Souls, so I can kind of just like manipulate them to kind of do what I want. Like, I know I can't I know if I overextend, I don't get punished. And I know once I deal with their Gul'dan and Doom Guards, I win the game because they have no other burst. So that's why I've teched in N'Zoth, because there's going to be other players like me playing Control Lock, and they're like, oh, he doesn't have N'Zoth, I can Twisting Nether early. Oh, wait. Like, so normally you'd save Twisting Nether for Gul'dan, and you save Twisting Nether for when they go off with Doom Guards. Those are the 2 points. But they also have N'Zoth. Now you have to deal with 3 more Void Daddies and N'Zoth, plus Rin or whatever in the Lackeys and stuff like that. So throwing in the N'Zoth instead of the Umbra allows you to get some cheesy wins against other control decks. But either way, very powerful deck. Not that difficult to play in regards to, like, other, like, if you said, Rob, which deck is easier, the cube lock, the cube combo lock, or the combo Dragon Priest, I would say that this deck is much easier to play than the combo Dragon Priest, and both of them fall very similar under the same tree of, you know, comboing spells together to create, you know, whether it's one large minion or a bunch of small, I wouldn't even call them small, but a bunch of Doom Guards. It's kind of under the same category. The last deck we're going to be covering is going to be the Zoo Warlock. Again, I think this deck is exceedingly powerful right now, and not a lot of players are playing Zoolock, and I don't know why, but I think the deck is really good. It does fairly well against almost everything. You know, being able to tap and continuously summon minions is very powerful, and then being able to Blood Reaver and bring back Doom Guards, Despicable Dreadlords, and just a whole field full of just craziness is good. Vicious Fledgling, I don't know why people stop playing that card. That card almost wins game by if you play Vicious Fledgling on turn 2, if you coin him out, or on turn 3, and he doesn't die, you just win the game. So why wouldn't you want to play a 3 mana if it stays on the board, you win the game card? That just seems too good. I've mentioned that so many times when we were playing Beast Druid. We played Zoolock before and played him, and he, like, you know, 2 out of 10 games, the card just wins the game by itself. It's insane. So I don't know why that got rotated out of the deck, but I keep him included. He's just too good. So anyway, again, pretty cheap deck in regards to some of the other decks. You know, most of the other control decks cost 10k Dust Plus. This Zoo Warlock is a little bit more expensive at the moment, but it should cheapen down once Corridor Creeper rotates out. And by rotate out, I mean nerf. He's not rotating. And yeah, that kind of wraps up the video here. If you have any comments, questions, concerns, or you'd like to add on to anything I've said, again, I try to make everything as fast and quick as possible to present you with the information so you can get on ladder, start playing against these decks, and know what the fuck you're playing against, or play them yourself, you know? So with that, love to hear what you say in the comment section below. I'll see you next month for another monthly meta, and or whatever the next video you watch is. As always, guys, appreciate you watching. I'll catch you in the next one. I'm Rob, of course, or Warshak, and happy whatever the hell day it is.